Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the Berkshire Conservation District for a special webinar titled Nutrient Management 101 with our guest speaker and presenter, Gary Blazejewski from the NRCS Pittsfield office. He's going to be joining us tonight to talk about some basic steps to maximize the quality of your lawn or garden while protecting your wallet and environment. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Gary. A couple of items prior to beginning to all of our attendees that are watching this live on Facebook, as well as on Zoom. If there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Since this is a webinar format, we won't be able to have anybody sharing their video or audio, but I'm going to be monitoring the chat on Facebook as well as on here. So we plan on having this be ending within 1 hour. So just, I'm going to keep track of everything so we stay on target, but we'll have some time reserved at the end for some questions and answers. So it looks like we are having some participants filter in, which is great. We're glad to see everybody. Welcome. And I am going to turn it over to Gary. Gary, thanks.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Adam. And I'm just going to start sharing my screen here, if that works. And I'll give a little bit of an introduction of who I am, what I do. So yeah, as Adam mentioned, my name is Gary Blazejewski. I work for a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture called the Natural Resources Conservation Service out of Pittsfield, Mass. And basically, what do? We do a little of a lot of different things but it's basically, we work with farmers and forest landowners to get conservation completed on their farm or forest land. There's a lot of things we do, but there's also a lot of things we don't do. And so I don't really want to get into that too much today, but we do everything from helping with some forestry practices that might benefit wildlife to helping farmers install high tunnels to extend their growing season, you know, some assistance with irrigation, some assistance with nutrient management, which is the talk of tonight, a little bit of everything. And so I don't claim to be an expert in nutrient management. I kind of see myself as a lot of a weekend warrior with a little bit more experience, maybe enough knowledge to be dangerous. But I don't see myself as a specialist, but I guess I see myself as I know the basics, and I'll move into my goals of what my goals were for this talk tonight. I can figure out how to, oh, it's going to be tricky to, okay, there we go. So the goals for today. My goal is not to make everyone on the call an expert in nutrient management. I don't want to scare people off with technical information. I just want to provide the basic concepts of nutrient management and why we should care. In addition, I want to provide an overview of soil health, particularly how it relates to nutrient management. We'll get into what soil health, I don't want people scared off by terms. We'll get into what soil health means. We'll get into what nutrient management means a little later in the presentation, but it's going to be a very simple, easy to understand presentation in terms of format. My main goal is not to make anyone an expert. I think that would obviously be impossible, especially because if we have X amount of callers on the call, I'm sure we have X amount of different operations. Some people are maybe interested in their lawn. Some people are maybe interested in joining simply for their apple tree. Some people might be joining for their garden. So the goal is to simply plant some ideas for you to consider, and just having an awareness of what exists out there, I feel then you can dig into it a little deeper, try to get information more specific to your lawn, garden, operation, what have you. So I just got to be careful on the shifting slides that I don't skip a slide here. Okay. What is nutrient management? First of all, nutrient management is simply applying the right amount of nutrients when the crop needs them. There's no point in applying a whole bunch of nutrients when the crop isn't even growing. So, you know, it isn't just putting the right amount of nutrients, it's also putting down the right amount of nutrients at the right time. So this might be, depending on the operation, pounds of nutrients per square foot, pounds of nutrients per acre, depending on the scale of the operation. In other words, it's simply balancing soil nutrient inputs with what the crop wants. Take lawn, for example. I think a general rule of thumb is about 40 to 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre of lawn. There's no point in putting down, you know, there's never a point in putting down more than what the crop needs. The crop can only take up so much. So moving into, before we really break down to how to know the amount of nutrients and stuff like that, and I first wanted to focus on why should we care? And I think the main reason we should care is excess nutrients, they leave your property. They don't just stay in the soil necessarily and wait miraculously till next year. Excess nitrogen leaves the soil, you know, from a heavy rainfall, from maybe excess watering, but it can also leave the soil, you know, when soil erodes from your property. If you have permanent cover like a lawn, most likely you're not seeing much soil erosion. Depending on the operation, some people do have quite a bit of erosion, but most small gardens, lawn, I really don't see erosion an issue, but I do see the potential for nitrogen to leave a garden or lawn when we get 4 inches of rain, or when someone left a sprinkler on longer than they thought and they just really flooded their soil. That basically just washes out all the nitrogen that maybe you paid money to get applied. And so I think this gives a little bit of a plug to use a rain gauge. Pay attention to how much water you're putting on your lawn. Dig a little hole every so often after you've watered. See, did the water make it down 6 inches? Did the water make it down 4 inches? You don't want to put 8 inches of water down when you're watering your garden. Obviously, it's a waste of water, but in addition, just a reminder that that's going to take nitrogen and other nutrients out of the soil. Phosphorus is a little different. That typically leaves, due to the chemistry of it binding to the soil, phosphorus typically doesn't wash through the soil with excess watering. That typically leaves the soil profile as eroded soil, as it's attached to eroded soil. And, you know, just excess nutrients. What do I mean by excessive nutrients? I mean, like, essentially nutrients that aren't getting taken up by the plants. So continuing to why should we care? Because excessive nutrients have the potential to contaminate surface and groundwater. I just did a quick little Google search. It estimated that 12% of Massachusetts has groundwater nitrate concentrations of greater than 5 milligrams per liter. And so on that website, it said anywhere, you know, once you get above 1 to 3 milligrams per liter of nitrate in the groundwater, that's, you know, almost always due. It's a sign of human contamination when you get it above 5 milligrams per liter. That is above the natural levels. Why is that a problem to get nitrate in drinking water? It can be a problem if you get above 10 parts per million. Then it can cause blue baby syndrome, where the nitrate, I'm not a doctor, somehow the nitrate affects the body's ability to deliver oxygen in infants. And you can get blue baby syndrome with concentrations above 10 milligrams per liter. Luckily, I don't think that's a huge issue in Mass, but it is quite a bit of Mass that has elevated nitrate in the groundwater that it is worth paying attention to. So But for some other reasons as to why we should care, and I think this is a little more common that we see, excess nutrients do result in excessive algae or weed growth. You know, nutrients don't just come from fertilizer, they can come from dogs, they can come from wildlife excrement, they can come from septic systems. But, you know, it's a little bit of all sources, but it's definitely fertilizers that we put down on the ground can make their way into nearby water bodies. And excess nutrients, what do? A lot of times weed growth, algae growth is limited by nutrients. And so once you give those water bodies those nutrients, combined with, you know, other sources, that's part of the reason we get these excessive algal growths in our water bodies. Typically, phosphorus is the limiting nutrient in freshwater systems. So that's a reason to really pay attention to phosphorus as well as nitrogen. Nitrogen is typically the limiting nutrient in saltwater wetlands. But, you know, we're close enough to the coast that I think it makes sense to pay attention to both. Another reason to not want to apply excess fertilizer is greenhouse gas production. It definitely uses fossil fuels to produce most of the fertilizers available, to transport them to the store. In addition, they can be pretty pricey. And knowing some of the basic steps to nutrient management, I feel you can really reduce, possibly eliminate your fertilizer bill, depending on what you're using it for. So there will be, I think it might work best with this online format. We'll just save all questions for the end. But Adam, if you're seeing comments in the question and answer screen and you want to interrupt me, feel free to moderate, Adam. So.
Yep, no questions yet, but yeah, let's save a few moments at the end and we'll talk about any questions. Everyone that's attending, thank you so much. There's the chat button at the bottom if you want to put a question in there, and we'll get to it after the presentation. Thanks.
So now we'll start transitioning into the basic steps of nutrient management. And so, like I said, step one is really, step one is testing your soil to determine existing nutrient levels. UMass offers testing, UMaine offers soil testing. The next slide will show the soil test application form for UMass. But in addition to those universities, there's also some homeowner kits available. If you go to your local ACE, you go to Home Depot, they got those little colorful capsules. There you can test nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and pH. Those homeowner test kits, talking to, extensions in several states, talking to some of my professors from college, everyone has always said those little kits are surprisingly accurate. The benefit of them is you can go out on a Saturday morning, get the test kit, come back, test your soil, know exactly what your pH is, know exactly what your nutrient levels are for your project later that morning or in the afternoon. With UMass, UMaine, takes a little bit of planning, collect the sample, you need to mail it in. And yes, they can do a more comprehensive, more scientific test. But at the same time, the downfall is it takes a little bit more of your time to mail in the sample, wait for the results. It had, like everything, they've been a little bit affected by COVID. UMaine for a while was a little more responsive than UMass. I don't know what the current COVID backlog of soil samples are at this time. But so this is, and you don't need to read everything on my screen. I'm guessing it's a little bit small font, but basically with a little Google search, you can UMass soil testing. It'll take you to their soil testing website where you can download a form, Same thing with UMaine. Do a little search. You can download their form. You see here, I'll read what I need to off the form in case you can't read it. The routine analysis is $20. You can also look into organic matter. We're going to talk later about the importance of organic matter in the soil. You can add that on for $6. You also can do a nitrate test for $8. People might be wondering, why don't they test nitrogen in the standard soil test? And it's my understanding that the reasons they typically don't test the nitrate and nitrogen in the soil is because with a good rain that can be gone quickly, that can be misleading. So so what they'll basically do is when you put in your crop code, whether you do mixed vegetables, whether you do a lawn, you will see on the back side of the form, and it was such small font and so much text, I didn't share it today, but you'll see the back side of the form when you mail this to UMass, you can indicate what is the purpose of the soil test. It's for my lawn, it's for my veggie garden, it's for my fruit trees. Based on what you're growing, they will give you a nitrogen recommendation for that season of what you should put down each year. But this comprehensive soil test will look at phosphorus, potassium, and a bunch of other micronutrients. It'll give you pH, which pH is very important to pay attention to, obviously, because a lot of nutrients, depending on what the pH is, I think most of the people on the call are probably a little familiar with this, but just in case they're not, we'll go over just the basics. If pH gets high, as pH gets too high, certain nutrients become unavailable to the plant. As pH gets too low, the same thing can happen. Certain nutrients become unavailable to the plants. So that's why you want to pay it, getting the soil test, they'll tell you what your pH is, they'll tell you what most of your nutrient levels are at, and they'll give you some recommendations about, okay, you're trying to grow lawn, we recommend doing this to change your pH. We recommend adding this amount of nutrients. And so it really takes a lot of the guesswork out of the fertilizer application process. And I think it also leads to more success, and depending on what you're trying to grow. And by taking out the guesswork, I think that means you can save a lot of money buying only the fertilizers that you need, rather than just taking a guess of what you need. The bags of fertilizer in the store may give some recommendations, but at the same time, they don't know what your individual soil already has. So I think there might be some questions here. I'm not sure how well I covered that and if I've confused a lot of people or not. But...
Yeah, so Gary, we have a few questions.
Okay.
I had to take a phone call, so I wasn't listening all the way. But the first one is, do we know what the main sources of excess nitrogen are?
I do not think we do, and I think it can probably change very quickly. And I've moved around this country a little bit, and there's definitely always a lot of finger pointing, because it's never anyone in particular. It's always the neighbor. It's always the person up the street. So that's really, I guess me, based on my experience and my, professional judgment, it's maybe not I'm going to guess and say, go out on a limb and say it's all of the above. We all contribute to it. I don't know what the main sources are, but I definitely think it changes as you change locations within the state or a geographic region.
Yeah, great answer. This is one that I've heard in a few different conversations, but I'll expand upon it slightly. How do you convince an HOA, or in my case, let's say a municipality or a commercial entity, that is hard set on a green toxic lawn next to a lake to take this issue seriously? Any recommendations on that?
I guess, we all know that we never want to be confronted with an accusing attitude. I think a general rule of thumb is communication and education is always best. And I guess maybe my approach would be, if the homeowner association has any type of board or natural resources council, or depending on the size of the operation, maybe they will have a board or a natural resources council. And I guess starting by attending a board meeting and saying, why don't we do a soil test to see what our existing nutrient levels are? A lot of lawns do not need phosphorus applications. And so then there'd be no reason to even apply phosphorus. A lot of states do not allow lawn companies to even put down phosphorus. So I think getting involved, talking to the board, maybe saying, hey, can we do a soil test just for kicks, for starters? Can we do a soil test to start seeing what our existing levels are? I think another option too, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is if you're not harvesting a crop, a lot of those nutrients stay in the soil. A lot of people like to bag their lawn. If you're having a garden, you definitely like to bag your veggies and remove that crop from the garden. If you're removing a crop, okay, you're taking nutrients away. Possibly the homeowner association board would be interested in just leaving the grass clippings. I don't know if people are open to that idea, leaving the grass clippings so that nutrients get returned to the soil. In theory, then you won't need as much. Maybe another option for a homeowner board would be a survey among homeowners. What are your goals? When we work with farmers, it really comes down to, what are the goals? If 9 out of the 10 homeowners really want this neon green lawn, then great. Maybe it's going to be tough to convince them otherwise. But if a lot of people are starting to question, how green does our lawn need to be? Do we want to try to make more an informed decision about what we put on our lawn? Maybe a survey of homeowners is not a bad place to start.
Good suggestions. Let's see. There was a comment from Lori. Thank you, that UMass soil testing lab overwhelmed, as well as New Hampshire doing soil testing. Gary, do you have any resources that you can share about who's doing soil testing and any capacity issues, especially in light of COVID, and where attendees can send their samples? I knew UMass and UMaine both got a little backed up at times, but they have been responsive when I've called on the phone. I don't know if I got lucky or what when they answered my calls about, last time I called was probably a month or two back. I know there's private labs that do it. I guess my recommendation would be simply do a Google search. Just, in New Hampshire, maybe there's a university or a lab that does it. If anyone else on the call has any information of where they've gotten soils tested, feel free to maybe share that in the chat. Yeah, Cynthia just shared with us. Cynthia is the Conservation District's program administrator. She shared that Cornell is doing soil tests, so that might be an opportunity for people to explore as well.
Yep, a lot of people have used Cornell. So I will move on, if that's okay, to give some time for questions at the end. So, determine crop needs. If you do the soil test, that gives you recommendations for almost all the nutrients but nitrogen. Quick Google search I did in preparing for this presentation. General rule of thumb, if you are interested in fertilizing your lawn, a general rule of thumb was putting down 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So that's something to go off of. But if something to think about is, if you do your soil test and you don't need any other nutrients, the only thing you maybe want to put down is nitrogen, you should be selecting a fertilizer that is only nitrogen. And I can't speak of all the different types of nitrogen and forms and chemical formulas that it comes in and what's best. But what I can speak for is you can pay attention to how many pounds you need to put down. You don't need to just buy a fertilizer that comes with a whole bunch of other assortment of nutrients, because you're just wasting your money buying those other nutrients. Instead, focus on simply the nutrients that your crop needs. Maybe what you need is not perfectly available in all formats, but it can't hurt to at least be knowledgeable about what your goal is that you're out to buy when you're looking. If it means step 3, determine the acreage or square feet. Use online tools like Google Earth to measure your lawn. Use a tape measure to measure your garden. Start getting an idea of how many, I don't know how many people really have paid attention to the square feet or acreage before putting down the fertilizer. So then the other thing that I wanted to mention is apply the right amounts of nutrients at the right time is step 4. So you want to put down those nutrients when the plant is actively growing. You don't want to put down your nitrogen fertilizer in the fall when the plant can't take it up. That's going to do nothing for you. That's likely just going to be washed away with winter moisture. The one caveat I will say is I know these a lot of these companies are pretty market savvy. They want you to be able to put something down throughout the year. And so, yes, I'm sure they have some technologies like, slow release nitrogen where you can apply it at a time. It takes time to become available in the soil. And so if it takes 3 to 4 months, to become available, that's a case where, yes, you can put it 3 to 4 months down before your vigorous growing season. But for the most part, you just really want to focus on what you're putting down, and you want that put down timed in a way that the nutrients will be there when the crops are growing through active growth, June, July, August. So moving on, I just wanted to, like I said, one of the goals of this talk was just to plant some ideas for people to consider. I definitely didn't want to come in here and tell everyone what to do, and I don't have all the answers. Everyone knows their property much better than I do, and everyone knows their goals much better than I do, but I did want to give some options to consider. Especially, for this first bullet, use phosphorus-free fertilizer and soaps. Phosphorus-free soaps comes into play if you're on a septic system, or even if you're on sewer, that phosphorus makes its way to the town sewer. Something to consider is always using phosphorus-free fertilizer. Like I said earlier, soil tests will tell you for sure, but a lot of times the soils around here have enough phosphorus to support a green lawn. Or for a garden, you might need to add a little bit, but I'm guessing a lot of the gardeners on the call probably add a lot of compost to their garden. I know composting is very common, and so they might be getting their phosphorus from there where they don't need to add any more phosphorus. I always wondered about number 2, promoting clover in a lawn. I know me, because I don't water my lawn, the clover is the only thing that stays green through the droughts a lot of times. But just one thing I wanted to point out is some people are obsessed with removing clover from the lawn. Clover does take nitrogen out of the air and can convert it into a form that's readily available for your crops, your lawn. So that's something to consider, whether you want to plant clover, whether you want to just encourage growth of clover, rather than treating it to remove, something to consider. You can save some money there by promoting clover, where all the little micro bugs will take nitrogen out of the air and convert that nitrate into plant available nitrogen. One thing I mentioned before, leave grass clippings in place so that they can decay in place. The other thing I want to mention is, I know we all like a nice clean garden rather than looking at all dead last year's growth that's been killed by frost. But leaving it in place to decay naturally is a great way to return it to the soil. Another idea altogether, if you're sick of watering and you're sick of fertilizing, maybe planting native habitat's a good idea. You know, a lot of people, I think, are getting more interested in wildlife habitat, pollinator habitat. Planting native species is a great way to sometimes save some maintenance, some water, and some fertilizer costs. And then the last thing to do, which is where we'll transition for the rest of the talk, and let's see how I'm doing on time. I want to try to move along a little bit more to give some more time for questions. So improving soil health. That is how we'll transition now to how to improve soil health. First of all, what is soil health? The fancy science definition is the capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. In other words, let's put that into a simple definition. The soil is very complex. There's a whole bunch of bugs and fungi and bacteria and protozoa and critters. There's a whole bunch of critters in the soil. In simple terms, the health of that microscopic soil world and all its critters is what is being referred to these days as soil health. This soil health topic is really a topic where I'm encouraging you guys to dig into it. There is a wealth of resources on the internet, in books. There's just information on soil health all over the place. Why should we care about healthy soil? A healthy soil is more likely to produce healthy vegetation or crops with limited inputs throughout stresses such as pest, pressure, and drought. In simple terms, I always like to put it in simple terms, be good to the soil microbes and they will be good to your crops. So the soil health principles is what we'll talk about next. Apply to essentially they apply to almost every type of operation throughout almost all of the US. The USDA has put together their little soil health principle, graphic here, because these are the 4 things that basically apply through all operations. 1, you want to provide continuous living roots. Why do we want to provide living roots? Plants give sugars, they give organic matter to the soil. Having living roots feeds the soil bugs, the soil critters, it gives organic matter to the soil. That's why we want to have living roots. 2, we want to minimize disturbance. I have a couple of other slides on this. Plowing the soil, rototilling the soil, it does take away a little bit of your soil organic matter that's bound up in that soil. And when you till it and disturb it, that soil organic matter becomes a little more available to the soil bugs. The soil bugs start eating it, and then that soil organic matter can be given off into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Another basic principle of soil health, maximize soil cover. We've talked about nutrients leaving your farm, leaving your lawn via erosion, leaving your garden via erosion. Keeping that soil covered will minimize erosion, as well as keep the bugs cool. We'll talk a little bit later about, just like we like shelter on a hot day, keeping us shaded from the sun, the bugs like that too. And then lastly, maximize biodiversity is good for soil health. Instead of having a monoculture, especially with a garden, it's good to mix a whole, crop rotation, species diversity. I'm sure a lot of us on the call have talked to that, have some experience in that. And so basically these 4 soil health principles, just focusing on the graphic, you don't need to focus on all the words all around it. What do? The soil health principles are really designed to lead to soil aggregate formation. It basically, and as well as in addition to creating the soil to form little aggregates, it increases soil organic matter. Aggregate formation and soil organic matter formation are 2 really big points. Why are they important? 1, when you have, as this graphic shows, looks almost like little bunches of grapes. When you have a bunch of soil particles cling together to form a larger aggregate, you start getting larger pore space. Why is the pore space important? One, and a graphic later I have will show this, water is able to get into the soil much faster when you have good aggregates, because then you have larger pores. It isn't rocket science. We all know that water goes through larger pores faster than it does through tiny pores like we'd have in Play-Doh, where there's very, very, very tiny pores. In addition, the soil aggregate formation gives the bugs, the critters, somewhere to live. We really don't, I think we all think that the soil bugs are all just tiny and they can just get through any size pore they want. That's not true. Those bugs really do. They need a little bit of space to live, just like we do. Yeah, maybe some are small enough to get in the smallest of pores, but not all of them. The way to get a healthy soil, you want that diverse population of soil critters all living in one community. They all have their little benefits of what they do. They live around the roots. The roots give to the soil. The roots will give sugars to the bugs. And in addition, those bugs will eat those sugars. They'll leave their excrement. You know, they'll be bringing nutrients to those roots. So it's like, the more you read about soil health, the more you'll realize there's a symbiotic relationship between the plant growing, doing the photosynthesis, giving organic matter to the soil, and meanwhile, beneath, the bugs are bringing nutrients to those roots in return. So the take-home message of the soil principles, the soil health principles, as we've said, it creates soil aggregates. Soil structure is another word that it's called. It increases population, the percentage of soil organic matter. They lead to healthy microbe populations. They lead to greater nutrients available to the plant or crop. We've discussed having these large pores leads to water infiltration, which in return leads to less erosion. So I'm going through this slide. This slide's a good example of the million studies that are available on the internet for look at. This soil in the bottom, I think even if we're not all soil scientists on the call, we can all tell that the soil on the left looks like a nice healthy soil. The soil on the right, you know, it doesn't look as dark, it doesn't look as rich. There's a lot of studies on the internet where scientists have looked at the same soil. This is the same soil. Part of the field was plowed, you know, 17 years had soybeans. Part of the field was forest that didn't get plowed. A lot of these studies, they maybe have a fence line that didn't get plowed. And you'll see the difference of continuous disturbance, continuous working the land, not paying attention to soil health, how the soil can change with time. You know, just looking at the soil from this too, it just looks, and you know, there's a lot of YouTube demonstrations where you'll see how water infiltration is really reduced on a beat up soil like the one on the right. In this one, soil organic matter has gone down from 4.3% down to 1.6%, which is huge in terms of soil health. You know, soil organic matter does everything from allow water into the soil to buffering against drought because it holds on to the moisture. I think most of us on the call are probably very familiar with that soil organic matter is important, hence why a lot of us do composting, stuff like that. So it isn't just the people with the big John Deere tractor that do the plowing, you know. Rototiller's just as good at disturbing the soil as any piece of John Deere equipment. You know, I'll be honest, it doesn't mean you should never disturb your soil with a shovel or a rototiller. I think it simply means if you're trying to increase your soil health, you should be thinking about, how can I disturb my soil less? Am I just, you know, tilling it right now with my hoe because I want to see a nice perfectly clean brown soil bed going into winter or before I plant. Things to think about. Maybe you only need to disturb where you're putting your transplant in the ground. Maybe you only need to disturb where you're putting your seed. I think a lot of people, it's just, I know with me, my dad did it, so I started doing it. Oh, yep, every fall you turn it over. Every spring you turn it over. If you want to keep doing that, that's fine. But at the same time, depending on what your goals are, I just want to plant the idea of maybe you want to work on disturbing your soil less. This is just a kind of a neat looking graphic that talks about repeating, what happens when you have all these aggregates of soil in an undisturbed soil. That soil organic matter is, tied up. The bugs, the soil critters have access to eating that soil organic matter, but a lot of it they can't get at. It stays in your soil, which is a good thing. When you start disturbing, those aggregates get broken up. What happens? The guy that taught me this principle said it's like teenagers with pizza. Once you open the pizza box, once you break up those soil aggregates, the bugs get in there, they start eating just like teenagers do, and the next thing you know, that organic matter is given off as CO2 into the atmosphere and you lose it from your soil. So, this was just, a good picture of, in this picture, we're keeping the soil covered. What I think is nice about this here is in a hot summer day, you can really see all that mulch is going to really keep the soil a little bit cool. Just like we don't want to live in 120-degree baking sun, the soil critters don't like to live in 120 degrees sun. One thing, the soil and soil health principle that maybe isn't being applied here is diversity. Things to think about is, hey, maybe you want to get more diversity, and it looks like here, it looks like it's just one species that they planted. But either way, you can also picture, not only is that residue in mulch keeping the soil cool, you can picture if you get a really hard rain, those raindrops are not going to be very effective at causing erosion there. It really does look like that mulch is going to break up the impact from the raindrops. I think this is one of the slides that really got me interested in soil health. Ray Archuleta is one of the leaders in my agency, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, that really got us going in the soil health direction, where he said, and he was a very passionate guy, where he'd look at a soil like this and he'd say, look at this. This soil is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. What does he mean by that? One, it's naked where it's subject to erosion. In addition, it's awful uncovered from the sun. What's going to happen when that sun gets above? That soil is going to get so hot. Hence, it's running a fever. The soil bugs do not flourish in a 120-degree environment, just like we don't. Why are they hungry? What are the soil bugs supposed to eat right now? There's no living roots. There's no photosynthesis going on. There's no sugars and organic matter, decaying material, contributing organic matter to the soil to feed that underground population. You really want to feed that underground population. Why is it thirsty? Because when you get a big storm event here, what do we all picture happening? I picture a lot of erosion. Being disturbed, having no vegetation, I think we're a lot more prone to erosion rather than if we had some nice cover like the previous slide. This is just a slide I really just wanted to point out, what do these aggregates look like? Once, like I said, there's tests all over the internet of the same soil right next to each other, but with different managements. This one had permanent cover for 20 years and then 5 years of conventional farming. This one was 25 years of conventional farming. We all know which one's going to have better infiltration. Once that water infiltrates, then it can be more available during a drought. This one, we're going to get less infiltration. A lot of water that we're going to want to reserve for the drought time is going to just instead run off. So how do we know if soil health is improving? one thing that it doesn't say here is just, a lot of times the soil will just get darker. We all see that in compost. And I guess that's reflected in the organic matter increases. In reality, you should be seeing a crop response. You should start seeing better nutrient levels on your soil test. Should see water infiltrate better, less erosion, and you should see better soil aggregate formation. So, just looks like there was a graphic in this slide. Like I said, there's oodles of information, books, articles on the internet. I'm sure there's podcasts, YouTube videos. If you want to learn more, it's all out there. So anyway, that's what I had. It did take a little longer than I thought, but I think I have plenty of time for questions. And in addition, if I go back to that beginning slide, I can't remember if I put my contact information there for how people can get a hold of me if they have questions after. Yep, there's my phone number and my email address. If you do have questions for me, as I was telling their first listeners on the call, I am going to be at this current position just another week or two. So if you do have questions, email me within the next week, because I am moving on, but I'll still be happy to get back to you as long as you get in touch with me and we start the communication exchange before I move on. We can get your questions answered. Like I said, I'm not a nutrient specialist, but if you start having some complex questions, I can maybe get us in touch with the right people to get those questions answered. So, any questions?
That all sounds great, Gary. Thank you so much for presenting this evening. I really appreciate you being here, sharing all of your information and advice for not just us as supervisors in the district, but also the attendees. So thanks again. One question, are there cover crops that can actually provide a crop in the veggie garden?
One of the biggest cover crops that you'll see is tillage radishes. And you can look online, you'll see all kinds of interesting photo where people are growing these 2-foot radishes, stuff like that. I don't know if those tillage radishes are typically edible. I know a lot of people feed them to livestock. A lot of people will do an assortment of cover crops and let livestock graze after, which is a good thing because it then brings in organic matter. In terms of a veggie garden though, I guess you could do peas. Peas are a legume. They're like a clover. They have the ability to take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and bring it into the soil, into a form of nitrogen that the plants can use. Peas is definitely one that I can think of.
Awesome. I think
another option too is, I know what I've done with my gardens, if you have 4 beds, maintaining 4 beds is a lot when you want to play on the weekends too. So what you can maybe do, you can go to, they'll have cocktail mixes is what they call it, these seed vendors. You can go online and I'm sure you can do a quick Google search for cover crop seed mixes. Instead of doing veggies every year, maybe if you get lazy, you can experiment with cover crops in 2 beds or 3 beds and plant veggies in the other 2 or 3. And, I think that'll be good for pest control. It'll be good for soil organic matter to give your soil beds a little rest one year with just an assortment of cover crops and then go back to veggie production the next year.
Wonderful. Let's see. So I think you can stop sharing your screen, Gary, and then I think, let's see. I'm going to mute you for a moment, Gary, because I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So again, thank you, Gary, and thank you to all the attendees. This was really well attended. I think at one point there was well over the amount of registrants that I last saw, but then it dropped down, which is awesome. A couple of points to close on. So the Berkshire Conservation District is celebrating its 75th year in existence. We were funded in 1946. So pretty crazy to think 75 years ago, a bunch of people took charge and decided to be of service to the district, to the citizens and the homeowners and landowners of the county, and gave a little bit of their time. It's an honor for myself as well as the other supervisors to serve and to represent the conservation issues that exist in the district and try to connect those issues with resources from the federal level, the state level, as well as the local level. So this presentation specifically was funded by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, Department of Conservation Services, as part of the Berkshire County Nutrient Management Initiative. There are going to be other items that we cover over the next 6 months, including webinars, but hopefully since the things have changed, we are going to be doing some things in person. So we'll keep you posted. A few ways to get a hold of us. We have our monthly meetings that are open to the public. Our link is posted on our website, berkshireconservation.org. We also have social media on Facebook as well as Instagram. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for on our website. And to Gary's point, conservation tillage or no-till methods of planting is something that we have been doing for quite some time now as a district, using a no-till seeder drill that is for rent. So if you are interested in renting that to be used on your land, or you know someone who could benefit from it, definitely reach out to Cynthia Grapaldi, our program administrator, or go onto our website and check out all the different information we have on there. The other point is that there are some great resources on the UMass website, the Center for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment. I have a few PDFs that I'm going to send out to all of the program participants. And if it's okay with you, Gary, I can send them a copy of your slide set. I don't know if we've talked about that. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. So those will be out there. And let's see, there might be another question in the queue.
And then Adam, I'll make one more comment.
Sure.
I can forward it to you if you don't have, but I think I put together, I know some people like a one-page handout, so I kind of put together that one-page handout if you want to share that with the group. Sure. Take away some of the basic points.
Thank you for that reminder. Yes, I do recall that. And then Cheryl asked, she says, thank you. Best wood for fungi in gardens with Berkshire weather in mind. Great question. What do you got, Gary? Do I need to unmute you?
No, so what best wood for fungi in gardens? Gosh, I'm going to say I do not know at all. I would say I can ask and try to get back. Another option I'll say is, maybe starting with like UMass Extension, or a local university extension service. I don't know if they'd have any tips. But if I have contact information, I'm happy to try to get back to them.
Wonderful. Yeah, Cheryl, if you want to put your email into the chat, actually, if you're registered for this webinar, I think I have your email and I can share it with Gary. But yeah, I agree. I will add that YouTube has been a fantastic resource for me to begin to see, kind of the hands-on approach, how people are growing their own mushrooms, specific species and things. But great question. Let's see. How about I ask Cynthia or David, anything that you guys need to, let's see, anything else that we can discuss? I don't know if I need to undo your video or whatever.
Okay. No, I would just say, that check our website because we have a lot of things going on. Besides the no-till cedar rental, we are planting pollinator gardens, and we just work in close cohorts with NRCS and working with farmers, landowners, homeowners, just to try to. Our mission is basically to conserve and protect the land and the water. So check out our website. You can join our mailing list on there too to be updated on different activities that we do.
Well said. yeah, we appreciate everyone attending this evening, and stay tuned. Hopefully there will be more content coming your way in the near future. So if there's no other questions in the chat, let me make sure I know where I'm looking. And yes, Cheryl, local groups that forage as well. Great resource too. All right, not seeing any other, I'm going to stop the live stream, and then I'm going to wish you all well. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you on the next webinar. Thanks again, Gary. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.